Today's podcast features Oli Chapman, Head of Study Programme and Development at the Institute of Masters of Wine. He takes us through the application process to join the Master of Wine programme. The first stage of the application process being open from the 6th of May until the 7th of June 2019. He discusses the entry requirements for making an application. We talk about the next stage of the application, the theory and testing exam. And he guides us through what the first year will look like, right the way up until the Stage 1 assessment in June 2020. Enjoy.
I'm Oli Chapman. I'm the Head of Study Programme and Development here at the Institute of Masters of Wine. I've been here for 4.5 years. Before that, I worked for University of London in distance learning, so in education. I saw the job come up here and I thought, wine and education, that sounds like a pretty good combination. So I applied for it, and lo and behold, I got the job. And as I say, my experience is in education rather than wine, so I don't have a wine library of knowledge, so to speak. I enjoyed drinking wine and talking about wine and finding out a bit more about it. But working for the Institute, we have 382 Masters of Wine who know more than enough about wine for them to have the knowledge that they need to manage the education programme and the exam, and I look after the sort of management and administration of the course. That being said, I've had the opportunity to join students and Masters of Wine on trips around the world to different wine regions, and that's helped to pique my interest in it, and I've met some really fascinating people and been to some interesting places, but I'm happy to leave the formal wine education to other people. I joined the Institute with Penny Richards as director, and one of the things Penny and I have really worked to do is to create a more open and transparent institute and a more open and transparent process around what it is to be a Master of Wine, what it takes to join the programme, how much it costs, how long it takes, all of those questions that I think have been a bit murky, for want of a better word, not purposefully, but we haven't been as clear as we might have been in the past. And I think one of the things we want to do is have people join the course who understand what the course is about and what it takes to pass. So we've created things like a prospectus, which we didn't really have before, which has got, as I say, open and transparent information about what it takes to join the programme, how much it will cost, how much time you might expect to be on the programme, and how much time you need to dedicate to studying. So we've really increased our efforts to what we call outreach, increase that outreach. So we've created a series of introductory courses which take place around the world for people thinking about joining the programme, or people who employ people who might think about joining the programme, or journalists, or anyone who has an interest in the institute. So we have these intro courses that happen in and around the world. We have information sessions, which are sort of hour and a half sessions, where we have Masters of Wine and a member from the education team here who are explaining about the institute, the study programme, and they happen at key trade fairs around the world, so Provine, Vinexpo, Texom in the States, or when we're out and about travelling for student activities in Australia or in Asia, all sorts of places where we want to explain the beauty, the intricacy and the quirkiness of the Institute, because we think it's much better for people to have a knowledge and an understanding about it than to live off these myths and rumours that have existed about what it takes to become a Master of Wine. So I'd say in the 4.5 years I've been here, the real drive has been for that open and transparent approach. And we've wanted to take the Institute out to the world, really. We're not waiting for people to stumble across it or to expect that they've heard of us. Obviously, if you're in the wine trade, we might hope that you have done, but you won't necessarily have done if you're in lots of countries. So we've really aimed to increase our presence and outreach in lots of different countries around the world. Definitely, we're keen to make sure that the Institute is as international as possible. You know, it should be a should represent what the wine trade stands for, which is a global trade. So we now have students in 40 countries, and that's a growing number. We know some countries we have 1 or 2 students in. Other countries we have a lot of students. When I first joined, I think the largest country where we had students based was the UK. That's far outweighed now by the United States. So we have the most number of students in the United States, followed by the UK. Then we have students in France, in Canada. This is in terms of student numbers. One of the countries when I first joined where we didn't have many students was Australia. We have lots of Masters of Wine in Australia, but we didn't have that many new students coming through, and so we've done quite a few activities in Australia to help to put the message out there about what the Institute stands for. And actually now it's our 5th largest market in terms of students. So we're doing what I think 20 years ago we would have hated the word, but we're doing a bit of targeted recruitment. We're identifying where the Institute should be important, should have presence, should have growth, should have new Masters of Wine coming through, and doing activities and initiatives in those countries or those regions that help to increase awareness of the Institute. Asia is one of those regions. We have traditionally a strong interest from Hong Kong. We have a smallish number of students in other Asian countries, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan is quite an interesting market for us, and China, of course. And I think it will take a little bit of time in China. So we have our first Chinese Master of Wine based in China a couple of years ago, Fongi Walker. And we've done a bit of work with Fongi to help increase knowledge and understanding about the Institute there. And I think it will take a little while for English language skills to kind of be up there, the trade requirements. So anyone joining the program needs to be firmly working in the wine trade, have wine qualifications, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit about this. And not that huge number of students have the WSET diploma, for example. So I think the numbers won't be as dramatic as we've seen with the WSET, for example, in China, but it's certainly a market that we need to be aware of. I think, lastly, South America and perhaps South Africa are countries where we haven't had as much student growth as we might have hoped. We now, in South America, we have students in Brazil, in Chile, in Argentina, in Mexico, and that's really positive, and we'd like to see that growing. In South Africa, we have a handful of students as well, and I think for the Institute it's important that we're seen to be focusing on those markets as well as the traditional European and North American markets.
So I mean, really, before we start into the main body of today, I think for me, listening to all of that international growth, and you've already just kind of started to allude to it there, I think it will help everybody to kind of address the elephant in the room, which may well be English language. A lot of the markets you spoke about there, certainly in Asia, they're not English speaking countries first off. So give us a sense of what level of English people need to have, really, and are any of the study materials or any of the presentations and the information that people will be expected to know available in languages other than English?
It's a really good question, and we want to make sure that students from around the world are comfortable studying for the MW study program. For the tasting side of the exam, students have to write those answers in English, so they have to have quite a good level of English. So they need to be able to understand the questions being asked and be able to write competent answers in English. We don't expect flowing and glowing prose in a tasting exam. We expect it to be understandable. It's nice when there is a nice flow to the answer, I'm told by the examiners, but students shouldn't be disadvantaged by not having the most fluent levels of English. For the theory side of things, so the longer sort of essay type answers, students can actually write in their own language, and the Institute will translate their answers into English for the examiners to mark it on par with all the other answers. So students can write the kind of longer essay answers in their own language, and students can bring dictionaries, English language or language dictionaries into the exam as well. So there's an understanding that the institute is an English institution or a British institution by heritage, but more and more we want to welcome international students to the membership, and so really it's important for us to be able to allow students to answer in their own languages for the theory side of things, but underpinning that there needs to be a sort of fairly good level of English for success in the tasting side. And lastly, you've got the research paper, which is a 6,000 to 10,000 word piece of research on their own subject. And for that needs to be submitted in English, but there's nothing to stop someone writing it in their own language and then having it translated. So there's ways around it for people whose language skills aren't as excellent as they might hope. As I say, we really want to make it as open as possible to people anywhere in the world.
So yeah, thank you for kind of painting the scene there, painting the picture, and I think me sitting as I am, sort of outside of the institute, it feels like that's a really interesting phase, really in its development, and certainly it feels like it's growing in its international reach, I guess, to really match what's happening in the world of wine. I mean, what the wine world is just such a fascinating area, and a lot of interest being driven, and I think it's quite right that the institute and the way that it goes about its qualifications and delivering the qualifications has changed to kind of reflect that. And the main real focus of today is going to be looking at the application process for 2019. So it doesn't necessarily need a question from me. It's just really just to throw open the door for you to guide our listeners through step by step. What is the application process? What does it look like? And what should they be bearing in mind and thinking about now, I guess, to see whether they are ready to apply and perhaps to increase their chances of success if they do choose to apply.
Sure. So the application process this year is opening slightly earlier than in previous years. We're opening applications on the 6th of May. Traditionally, we've opened them in June, and we've brought the whole process a bit earlier because we're splitting the application process and the entrance exam process into two distinct periods, and that's to give a bit more clarity around kind of when people can expect to get access to the entrance exam and things like that. So application window is the 6th of May and it closes on the 7th of June. And during that application form, applicants are asked a number of things, their wine qualifications. We expect applicants to have a wine qualification that's at least WSET diploma in level. Other qualifications that we'll look at the Master Sommelier, the MS Advanced, wine making degrees, wine MBAs. So quite high level wine qualifications, because we need students to sort of hit the ground running when they join the course. We're not able to go over sort of some of the fundamentals of that kind of the wine business and wine tasting. So we need students to have that foundation knowledge. Students are applying to join a membership organisation for the wine trade. So applicants have to be in the wine trade in the first place. So they have to have at least 3 years' experience of working in the wine trade. And actually that could be quite a broad experience. So it doesn't have to be one distinct area of the wine trade. I think when the institute was founded, probably the principal area was buying and selling wine, fine wine, through London and shipping it around the world. Whereas now we have education, people involved in education, journalists, writers, winemakers, buyers, sellers, consultants, everything, sommeliers, everything to do with the wine world. As long as it's associated with the wine trade, we would look to consider that person applying. Students, or applicants should I say, have to have a reference letter to support their application, and that's either from a Master of Wine or a senior wine trade professional, and that again reinforces the fact that we're a membership body for the wine trade. And lastly, applicants have to complete an entrance exam. So there's two parts to the entrance exam. There's the tasting side of things, and there's a theory question that they have to answer. And the entrance exam will be open from the 10th of June to the 28th of June, so about 2 weeks. So when people are applying, they know that they will have that window to do the entrance exam. And in terms of the entrance exam, so for the tasting, we will tell students 4 wines that they should try and procure in advance. They can conduct the tasting exam as what we call a dry tasting, so if they can't get hold of the wines, although they should be fairly commonly available around the world, they should be wines that they should be familiar with and have tasted in the past, so that when they open the online exam software, the questions that they've asked should be questions that they will be able to answer from their knowledge of how that wine will be tasting. And then the theory side of things, when they open the exam software, they will be presented with 3 questions from across the theory syllabus, and they will choose 1 question to answer. So we expect about 1,000 words on that subject. And the past questions that were asked, for example, last year, are available on the website for anyone to have a look at to see which sort of questions were asked. And they tend to be a cross-section from the syllabus. So if you're more comfortable in winemaking, you're likely to have a question around that area. If you're more comfortable in sort of the business and marketing of wine, then you're likely to have a question in that area. So there's a choice of questions that applicants will answer. So you've done all your application, filled in the application form, you've done the entrance exam. You then there's a decision made around those applicants who gets accepted onto the programme, and we have an admissions committee which is made up of Masters of Wine that make those decisions, so that they will look at the performance in the entrance exams, they will look at the candidate's application, their motivation to studying, the area of the wine trade that they're working in, the support in the reference letter that they will have received. And there's actually quite a few pairs of eyes that look at each application. So you've got 2 people marking the entrance exam, 1 marking the theory, 1 marking the practical. You've got 2 what we call readers, so Masters of Wine, who are looking at each application independently, who will then put forward a recommendation to the admissions committee, which is made up of 4 Masters of Wine. So you're getting up to 6 people, Masters of Wine, looking at each application carefully to make sure that we're accepting the candidates who stand the best possible chance of being successful in the programme. And we're also looking to put a class of people together that is an interesting mix of people, that people can learn from each other, learn from diverse cultures, backgrounds, areas of the industry, but who all stand a strong chance of being successful in the course. So we're looking for potential in the entrance exam. We know we're not looking for Master of Wine level answers, but we're looking for people who show that they have potential for success in the exam. So after all of that process, applicants will find out in early September if they've been given a place on the course. Last year we took around 50 to 60% of those that applied to join the programme. Traditionally, or typically, people who didn't get onto the course didn't fare so well in the entrance exam, and we give a bit of feedback as to where it looks like people fell down, so where they could focus on to apply in future years. And we do recommend or encourage people to not walk away entirely. You know, they're very welcome to apply again. But yeah, often it's the entrance exam or the trade, the 3 years trade requirement that people aren't quite meeting. And the interest in the program is growing, and there's only so much capacity that we can have, so we have to be quite careful in choosing the applicants to offer them a place onto the course. The course notionally starts in September. It's a self-study course, so it's not as though you will then receive your textbooks and you'll receive your timetable, and your tutor will tell you what piece of coursework every week to do as part of that study. It's up to students to motivate themselves to come up with their own study timetable. But there are timeframes and places throughout the year where candidates will receive support and guidance in their studies. So we have course days. These are a day-long tasting and theory sessions that happen around the world, in Australia, in Hong Kong, in London, and in North America. We have seminars, so these are week-long programs that students must attend. And in your first year, in stage 1, students decide whether they will attend one in Adelaide, in Rust in Austria, or in a place called Woodinville, which is not far from Seattle in Washington State. And they're kind of guided, tutored activities during that week, tastings, theory sessions, visits, lectures, outside speakers, that sort of thing. And all of this leads up to the Stage 1 assessment, which happens in June every year, and that's for candidates who are at the end of their Stage 1 will be preparing for that Stage 1 assessment.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for setting that out. I think it's very clear about those different deadlines, and we will leave a link below to where you can read all of that information as well. So anybody that wants to check and to see visually the application process will of course leave a link to that underneath this episode. I do want to ask a question about the 50 to 60% that you spoke about there in terms of people being accepted having applied. So instinctively, that feels quite high, given that I know that there's a much lower percentage that pass other exams along the way, and certainly the final exams going down the line. So could you maybe talk a bit about what that 50-60% might be sort of hiding in terms of, I guess, initiatives that the Institute is undertaking to make sure that the right people are applying in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, we want to make sure that the students that we're taking stand the best possible chance of being successful on the programme. So we're doing quite a bit of pre-programme initiatives to make sure that applicants know what the programme is about, what the timeframes are involved, what the costs are. So we have a couple of initiatives. One's called information sessions, which are hour-and-a-half long sessions that happen in sort of major trade fairs or other institute activities around the world with Masters of Wine and members here from the education team. And those are sessions where we explain everything that it is about the study program, as I've said, how long it takes, what the chances of success are. We have Masters of Wine who kind of give their own personal story about the course, and it's really important that people get those real life experiences so they understand from others what it took for them to be successful. And we have what we call introductory courses, which are 2-day programs that happen this year. They've happened in 5 different geographies around the world, and they are led by Masters of Wine. There's a mixture of tasting and theory exercises. There's practice entry exams at the end of those that the attendees will get feedback on. So we're doing quite a lot of pre-filtering, if you want, for those who are applying to join the program. We do a fair amount of telling people, actually, no, it's not quite the right time for you to apply. You've not got the right trade experience, or we might recommend that you take some WSET courses or another course to give yourself a better grounding. So by the time it gets to people applying, we hope that we've put some people off. We've encouraged some people to take a bit more time to apply to join the course. So those who are applying hopefully have a stronger chance of being successfully accepted. We'd much rather have fewer people apply and more people accepted, because they meet the entrance requirements, than have hundreds and hundreds of people apply and not that many people get on the course. So that's kind of why that 50 to 60 sort of percent mark stands as it is. I don't know if it would be helpful to talk a bit more about the percentages as we go through the programme. So in terms of the Stage 1 assessment, last year we had about 70% of people progressing from the Stage 1 assessment into Stage 2, which is the year or the period that people are preparing for their large Stage 2 examination, the 4-day long exam. Last year, in terms of the Stage 2 exams, the theory side of things, we had about 35 candidates pass the theory side of things, and the tasting side of things we had around 20 or so candidates. Now, I'm not going to give you the percentage of the overall pass rate for those different tasting and theory side of things, because candidates can resit that exam up to a number of 5 times. So it's not it's not completely black and white to say this is the pass rate for theory, this is the pass rate for tasting. And actually, we do lots of analysis to see whether the success rates on your first attempt increase your chances because you're sitting for your first time or your second time or your third time or your fourth time or your fifth time. We do a lot of analysis to check to see how people fare on their first attempt, on their second attempt, when they join the course, whether that had a bearing on how successful they will have been in the program. So we do a lot of statistical analysis to make sure that our decisions right back at the early stages of accepting people onto the program have a bearing on the success rates further down the line, and looking to see if a particular aspect of the wine trade, educators for example, fare better than winemakers, or buyers might fare better than for another aspect. And I'm not saying that they do or they don't, but actually for us that's helpful information to have, to say, look, actually for this group we need to give more support because they're not faring as well as other areas. So it's for us to use that data is really helpful to kind of guide our thinking in terms of our recruitment and admissions processes through to the support that we give candidates once they're on the course and preparing for their exams.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful to look ahead, because obviously this is looking ahead to May and the first application process. This is, if you like, the first hurdle, isn't it? I mean, this isn't a sprint. This isn't a sort of a 110 meters hurdle. This is more of a steeplechase. You know, there are many other hurdles further down the line. But I think you raised for me a very interesting element around what the institute itself must do in you know, that kind of analysis and looking at its own processes and its own recruitment processes. And I'm just wondering, you know, who looks at that then? Is it a case of you have statisticians here who will actually look at those data and look at who's coming through, or it might be a bit too meta, but I mean, do you ever actually have MW students ever looking at that as part of their research paper, the actual education of MWs?
That's a really good question. We've never had any research paper candidates kind of looking at that, but I could foresee that being an area of interest in the future. In terms of the data itself, we have a committee called the Education and the Exam Board, and those are that committee's really the principal driver for getting this data and analysing this data. So we've recently introduced a new database, which should hopefully mean crunching these numbers is a lot more straightforward than kind of using a lot of spreadsheets. So actually, in terms of statistics, it's me and my team that pull those statistics together, and they're reviewed by the Education Exam Board, who often will ask queries or ask for more data or check the accuracy of a particular statistic to make sure that the decisions that we're making as a result of those statistics are kind of fair and right. I think, again, one of the things that we've been keen on since I've been at the Institute is to use data to back up our decision-making processes. So we might have thought something was the case because 3 people have told us something, and we may have made a decision on that, whereas now we actually are much more keen to get data to back up those decisions, to make sure that we're making the right changes and introducing the right initiatives based on data that we have received. And actually one of the things that I've also introduced since I joined is an annual student satisfaction survey. So we're getting data on an annual basis from the students themselves. You know, the students are the future of this institute. They are the future membership, and so it's really important that we get really good data and information from them as part of their study experience, and that information is used, it's analysed, it's cut into different ways to make sure that we make changes that are relevant and that are useful for the next group of students coming through, and actually for the students who are on the course. Hopefully they will have seen changes and developments as a result of the feedback that they've provided.
So yeah, thank you so much. I think it's been really fascinating to kind of, a different type of episode today, but really get into kind of the mechanics of what the application process is, and let people who are listening, let them decide for themselves whether this year or maybe in the future it's something that they could foresee themselves doing. So really, just to close out, I'd just like to thank you again and just invite you to look ahead, to, I guess, the May window, to the application process you've got coming up, and by all means, share anything else that you didn't have the opportunity to share before.
Yeah, so I would just like to finish by saying that we are really striving for this openness and this transparency and a drive for a greater international group of students on the course. So this year, for example, we introduced a dedicated Stage 1 course in North America. Before that, students were together in Stage 1 and Stage 2 in North America. And we're wanting to make the experience of students as positive as possible. I will say that not every student will become a Master of Wine. We want to make sure that every student has a positive experience, has a valuable experience, looks back on their time as an MW student and recognises that the networking that they've gained, the contacts that they've built, the experiences that they've had has been a really positive and helpful one for their career. So, as I say, not everyone will make it, but we want to make sure that everyone on the course has that positive experience that helps them in their career and helps them personally and professionally. They will build friendships and contacts that will stay with them for the rest of their lives, and that's something that I'm really proud of, and I hope that the next generation of students coming through from this application window will certainly benefit from that.
Thank you so much to Oli for taking us through the process in such detail. I hope that in combination with his rigorous approach and my questioning about the process, it's answered a lot of questions that you might have had about making an application. I've included below the links to download the Master of Wine study program prospectus, and also the link to where you would start the application process. There is of course a wealth of written information on the Institute of Masters of Wine website to help you make the decision about whether now is the right time to apply for you. I'd also sincerely love to have your feedback on today's episode, whether or not you found it helpful, and whether you think there are other application processes in the wine world or the hospitality world you think that I should be looking at. Do get in contact with me. I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.